Hey, and welcome back to another episode of Get Outside St. Tammany. My name is Will Afton, and I work with the LSU Ag Center here in St. Tammany Parish. I deliver a horticulture program to the residents of this parish. Today we're actually outside on set at a community garden here in Covington, Louisiana. Now I assist Mr. Tim Elsie and Ms. Pam Mckay with this garden, teaching them how to grow plants and issues with fertilizer, pest management, and watering, and everything associated with growing plants in containers.
Hi, my name is Pamela Mckay of God's Unchanging Hands Feeding Ministry Incorporated, which was started in 2016. I prepare hot meals for the community, for our seniors, our struggling families, and our homeless people. And about a year later, I came up, God gave me a vision of the garden, and I contacted William from LSU on how do we go about. Well, we started off with raised beds, and then later on, this is the product of what our garden is. Our garden is based on God's plan for us here on this earth, and how we are to eat from the earth to nourish our bodies. The foods that we grow here definitely go to cooking natural foods for our families, to teach people how to eat healthy, more healthy, because we're dealing with people that have high blood pressure, diabetes, cancer, you name it, anything that ails the body. We have all our nourishments and medical needs definitely here in the garden. So I encourage people to start eating natural foods. I encourage you to start your garden at your home. And we're here to educate you on the foods that we do grow and the foods that you would have questions about. And working with our youth, we have a kids garden club that we started in March, I believe, and that has really worked out great. Our first time with them, this is the growth, this is what has happened with the kids coming and being involved. And you want to get your kids involved. You want your families involved. We want our seniors involved. We want people who actually want to eat healthier. That's our main concern, learning how to eat healthy.
Even if you don't have a large space in the yard to put an in-the-ground garden, you can grow vegetables in containers on your balconies, your patios, on that strip of land between you and your neighbor's house. If you have limited space, this is a great way to get some personal vegetable production and not be able to sacrifice a quarter of the yard to do so. So before we go around the garden and talk about some of the specifics that we have here in this particular garden, I just kind of want to mention just a few things to kind of start out with for those that have never grown plants before. So right now we're focusing on vegetable plants. Vegetable plants, we expect a lot out of our vegetable plants. We expect them to produce their fruit so that we can harvest it. We expect some of them to grow lots of leaves so we can harvest those. So we need to maximize the amount of sunlight we get. So, in some areas it might be pretty shady. Find your sunniest locations and start there. In this particular garden, obviously we have some trees around us, so we found one of the sunnier corners that receives some of the most light throughout the day, and that's where we started the garden there. So do that at the house too. Also, you want to make sure you're somewhat close to a water source. Okay, like I said, we expect a lot out of these vegetable plants. We expect them to do a lot of photosynthesis, hence the light. Well, we're also going to need water. So, especially if you're growing under a cover, definitely want to be close to maybe a faucet, somewhere to fill up that watering can, or a hose faucet you can attach a garden hose to so you can water these plants. We were special in this particular garden because City of Covington actually allowed us to hook up to the water supply, so we were able to add a faucet right here at the garden site, and that's how we water this garden. We have 2 sprinklers set up, but if we didn't have the sprinklers, we'd come out here and hand water or set up our own sprinklers. Ideally, I would love to move to a drip irrigation system here, and we can talk about that in a later episode. But once we get the sunlight taken care of, once we get close to water, once we check that off of our list, The next thing we're going to need is containers. So we need some type of container to hold some soil. There's a lot of decorative containers out there. You'll see in this garden we actually use recycled nursery pots, just because they tend to get stacked up on the side of a building there, and usually blow around in a hurricane. Well, we can recycle those and use those to produce plants in a in a container garden. The next thing is we'll need to fill these pots with some type of growing media. Those with in-ground gardens, we're used to just go digging in the soil, tilling and cultivating and loosening that to grow in. But here we're actually using a potting soil in these pots. The potting soil is going to be a lot lighter, so if you need to move them around, it's a lot lighter than heavy native mineral soil. We just used a basic garden soil here, something that we can get in bulk quantities because we had quite a few pots to fill up. However, for just a few pots, a couple of bags of potting soil will get you through the growing season. So another thing to think about, since we're growing in potting soils and not real native soils, is fertility. We're going to have to fertilize these things because there's no natural system here to replenish nutrients in this soil because it's all man-made. What we've done with this garden is we've taken organic growing philosophy, so we want to use organic fertilizer products. And I want to make sure that the fertilizer analysis has a value for each of those 3 numbers. And then if you can find one that also includes micronutrients, go with that one for your potted containerized plant production plan. And then the last thing, hey look, we got to check these things. So in this Covington community garden, we always meet out here Friday mornings at 9 in the morning, and we go through and we do any gardening tasks, but we're constantly looking at plants, observing plants, and making notes as to, maybe there's an issue about to happen. That way we can get on it soon and manage it properly. So anyway, that's kind of the basics of container gardening. So let's walk around this garden and we'll talk about specific plants that we have growing and any other interesting features that we feel need to be spoken. So right here, as you can see, we have some young developing yellow squash plants. Look, like I mentioned earlier, we use recycled nursery containers in this garden here. So as you can see, I got a pretty large size container. When selecting container size in a containerized vegetable garden, you always want to look and see how big do those plants get, and choose your container size based on that, because it's so easy to put a little cute squash plant in a little small pot and then only to have it a few weeks later completely root bound itself and you can't keep it watered. That's not going to work out. So we actually have some pretty large containers here for our squash plants, and that's just so that we can support this plant towards the end of its life cycle when we're harvesting all those fruit. And as you can actually see, we've had some fruit now. This is definitely an early producer in the garden, and they can be quite abundant. Squashes are also related to zucchini plants. If we go around the back side here, as we look at this zucchini plant, as you can see, it has a very similar look. They're very closely related. You could almost call them brother and sister. But the zucchini squashes, they do not turn yellow, so you just get that green fruit there. When the blossoms first started to appear on these plants, we had issues with them dropping off. They weren't pollinating properly. And anyway, all plants of the cucurbit family, this would also include cucumbers, they put out male and female flowers, and at the first part of the season you typically get just male flowers or just female flowers, and it takes a couple weeks for them to sync up so you can have male flowers open releasing pollen, and then you have active female flowers open accepting pollen. Then you can get pollination. So anyway, I'm kind of liking this now because we're starting to see a good bit of fruit formed on that. So anyway, look, squash and zucchini are just probably some of the most popular spring summer vegetable plants that you can grow. And look, we're growing them in containers right here in Covington, Louisiana. And over here in this section of the garden, we're growing our infamous tomatoes. I think everybody has tried to grow tomatoes. Some have great success and are able to give it away to their neighbors and friends. Some have the hardest time and can't get a plant to survive. But look, tomatoes definitely extremely popular in Louisiana gardens. Probably the most popular spring garden plant there is. Everybody has, like I said, everybody's attempted to grow one. So we started out by asking Miss Pam Mckay what types of tomatoes that she could use in her cooking, and she said she wanted some cherry-sized tomatoes and also some slicing type tomatoes. So we've actually got quite a diversity of tomato crops here. So what we're looking at right now is a cherry tomato. You guys, cherry tomatoes are what we call, they're indeterminate, so they'll keep growing as long as the weather conditions are favorable. So they can grow tall past this this last wire of our support structure here and just keep growing until cold weather hits it. What I like about cherry tomatoes is they're very easy to grow, very easy to produce a tomato crop. I like to recommend those to first-time gardeners. But anyway, as you can see here, we have quite a large size pot. As to what we said earlier, we're looking to help these plants out when they're a lot bigger. So we want to make sure that we pick an accommodating pot size. Now tomatoes, when they set fruit, they're going to add a lot of weight to those branches, so it's very common that people will tie up and support those stems and branches of their tomato plants. The easiest way to do that here is using tomato cages like what you see here. You can purchase these things in different sizes. I went with the largest size available. Right next door here, we're growing a different type of tomato. These are our slicing type tomatoes, so they make a a lot larger tomato that we can slice into pieces, eat on our sandwiches and hamburgers, things like that. We went with a tried and true variety called Celebrity. If you've ever bought a Creole tomato, there's a really good chance that it was actually a Celebrity grown down in St. Bernard and Plaquemines Parish. This is what we call a hybrid variety, so we get a lot more fruit set out of hybrid varieties. They're way more productive than some of the other varieties out there. But this is what we'd call a determinate tomato. So as you can tell, they were planted at the same time as the cherry tomatoes I talked about previously. However, these are a lot shorter. These grow to be a shorter plant. They grow to a determined size, hence why we call them determinate tomatoes. So these actually make really nice plants for the patio because they stay nice and compact, whereas the cherries, they'll get 7-8 feet tall at the end of the year. So if you don't have the space, that can become quite annoying. But anyway, look, these have been in the ground 5-6 weeks, just like our cherry tomatoes. You notice we've already got some flowering in these plants, and then we got some of our first fruit sets. So in a few weeks there, we're going to get real excited about harvesting some of our first tomatoes. And in this section of the garden, as you can see here, we're growing bell pepper plants. Bell pepper plants don't get as big as tomatoes, as you can see here by their short shrubby appearance. And because of that fact, we're attempting to grow 3 plants in that same size container. Bell pepper plants are a little bit more temperamental to cold weather. As you can see here, our plants are in full bloom, and if you look closely, you'll actually see we have some fruit set out here. So it'll be nice to harvest some nice large green bell pepper to use in some of those meals that Miss Pam Mckay is preparing for her constituents. And as we come over to this section of the garden here, you'll see that we're growing some eggplants. Eggplants are another really easy crop to grow, related to tomatoes, related to the bell peppers. Eggplants are, a good summertime producer. These plants will actually last quite a long time in the garden here. With those big heavy fruits though, there's a weight issue once those fruit do set, and then they begin to grow and develop before we harvest. So you'll see here that we've put support cages on these as well. And if you put the cages on early, that plant it easily just grows through the cage, is able to support itself. I see a few flowers on the eggplants, but I mean, this is still pretty early in the season, so really just expecting to grow a little bit more. They're not going to produce until later into the summer, but once they do start producing, those plants will last until the fall. So if you're just looking to get a lot out of a garden, it's always nice to include a few eggplant plants because they definitely hold up their end of the bargain. And as we move around the garden, I wanted to kind of highlight our herb growing section. It's great to grow a lot of vegetables and whatnot to use in cooking, but herbs are what come to mind when you really make some flavorful food. So we're blessed here in Louisiana. We can grow a lot of different herbs, as you can see here. Like here in this first couple of pots here, we're growing green onions. These are called bunching onions, and these plants were actually kind of recycled from store-bought green onions. So if you don't cut all of your root in pieces off, you know, you can actually set that in a little soil and they'll regrow and root themselves, and they're called a bunching onion. So that bunch of onions gets bigger and bigger, and as you need green onion, you just kind of take some off of the side, and within a couple weeks it'll replenish itself as that bunch gets bigger. So got a few pots of just bunching green onion here for use in the kitchen. Obviously we had to have a rosemary plant. In some parts of St. Tammany, rosemary plants are evergreen plants. They'll grow outside, stay green year round, and live year after year. Another very common herb plant that we see in cooking and different recipes or whatnot, parsley. Very popular plant there, and it's this is kind of the peak of the season for parsley here. Once it gets really hot, parsley will kind of fizzle out, but as you can see, our parsley is good and healthy. We've also got chives. It looks a lot like green onions, but another fresh herb that we can chop up and add to the meal. Basil. Our basil took a little bit of a hit when it got cool here a few weeks ago, because it really likes the warm weather. But as you can see, we've got new leaves and it's growing just fine. I've got some oregano growing here that's looking fine, and also sage. And some more chive plants. So as you can see, we can grow a pretty big diversity of herbs. We have literally just scratched the surface. Lots more out there to grow. So anyway, don't forget about growing a few herbs in with your vegetable plants. And in this section of the garden, we are attempting to grow sweet corn in containers. I haven't actually seen sweet corn grown in containers, because normally with corn you need to have a fairly large planting. One neat little interesting fact about corn is that, you know, with all plants we learn about how those flowers are pollinated by insects. Well, corn is a little different. Corn is not pollinated by insects, it's actually pollinated by the wind. Pecan trees are actually the same way. But what happens here is, you know, we produce the tassels on the very top of the plant, and then you have the female flowers on the lower portion, the lower shoots of that plant. And then as the wind, the breeze comes through and moves things around, that's where we get the action to put pollen onto pistil and get fertilization. So, why is that important in the garden? Well, when we grow sweet corn in the ground, we usually grow a couple rows. We like to grow a block of sweet corn. We like it to be just as wide as it is long, okay? So in a container garden, we usually don't have that much space and we can't create that big of a block. But, you know, we had a few pots here, so we've basically recreated a block of sweet corn here in this containerized garden. If you look in all the vegetable guidelines, they tell you to plant corn about 10 to 12 inches apart. We tried hard to get them 10 to 12 inches apart in these pots. Then we've got 4 plants in each pot, and as you can see, we've kind of got them set up in a square shape there to replicate that block-like planting design. So everything looks good so far. You know, we've got good growth on our corn. You know, everything's coming up, so we're hoping that once we start getting into flower stage, that you know, we have enough of a block here to at least get maybe a bag or two of sweet corn to use in the feeding kitchen. And the last plant I want to talk to you about in our container garden here at the Covington Community Garden are potatoes. And in particular, we call these Irish potatoes, just to separate them from sweet potatoes. The two plants are not related, they're actually in different plant families. It's just that it gets a little confusing when talking about potatoes, especially in South Louisiana where we eat a lot of sweet potato. But these are Irish potatoes. These are potatoes that you put in your crawfish boil, or you eat as maybe a French fry or potato chip. But basically, towards the end of January, the 1st of February, you're going to notice that all your garden centers sell what they call it seed potatoes, and they are actual potato pieces that we use to produce new plants. That's how we propagate potato. You know, a few months ago we did just that. We bought some seed potatoes, we cut them up into smaller pieces, and then once they healed over, we actually planted them in these containers, okay? But at that time, we did not have this much media in these containers. It's actually kind of a neat way to grow potatoes in containers. We started out with maybe about 1/3 of the volume of this pot filled with media, and then we laid out those cut up seed potato pieces, okay? Kind of evened them out with our 3 pots here. And then we covered them up with a little bit more media, okay? Once those things sprouted and started to grow, And as they got so tall, then we came back in and added another layer of media, okay? Now we're at about 2/3 the volume of this pot. As they continued to grow at that point, they kept growing taller, we came in and added that final layer of media. So that's where we're at right now. We've basically filled these pots up with media, and as you can see, that potato plant is still growing. So our original seed potatoes were down here. Now the tips of these plants are way up here. What we've done is we've expanded the root system of that plant, and that's where we harvest potatoes from. So in essence, it's a way to intensively manage a potato plant to get the most amount of production out of those plants. So we went with that technique in our community garden here, and once these tops start to die out as the heat sets in, that's an indicator to us that the plant's about ready to harvest. And what we'll do here is we'll probably put a tarp on the ground and literally just push these over and empty them out and then go collect potatoes. So let's see what happens this year.
I'm excited about the turnout of how everything is going, and I appreciate all the support. Our mayor here of Covington, Mark Johnson, he really works a lot within the community to make sure certain projects get done. And then he sent me my angel, I call, and his name is Tim, to help out with producing the garden. So with LSU, Tim Melzy, and me, God's Unchanging Hands Feeding Ministry, we really got it going together. The thing is, we're going to grow with it. We're going to learn how to eat healthy together. We're going to be one big family instead of all of us separating each other from whatever it is that separates us. But this should give us all a great connection within the world and with people.